Grab a seat. We're going to get started here in about 30 seconds or so. So once again, we're covering just a tiny little bit of material, a couple of minor prophets, half the book of Isaiah. So here's how I thought we might break this up today. We're going to start off with history. Daryl's going to cover the history section from 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, and then from there we're going to move into the prophecy section with Isaiah. And then if we have some time left, which I hope we do, we want to talk a little bit about Hosea. What did you guys see this week? Anything that you saw this week that you had questions on? Any aha moments? Anything where you said to yourself, I don't like this, or did anything stand out to you?
How or why did Judah escape the Assyrian exile? I know it was God's plan, but how did they get out of home? And the second part was, did Isaiah go into exile? Did the prophets go into exile and go to Assyria? Or did they get to escape to Judah?
The question was, did all the prophets, or did any of the prophets go into exile? I think there's at least a couple. Ezekiel's an exile prophet. We haven't got to him yet.
Correct.
But, yeah. Jeremiah. So, and the other question was, how did Judah escape Assyrian captivity? I think God was giving Judah more time because they at least had some good kings in their midst. Israel was so bad, they got taken out earlier. Actually, when you look at Hosea, when we get to that one, it actually talks about, he says in chapter 1, I'm basically done with Israel. Judah I love. I'll take care of her for a while, but then I'll bring them all back. And so you kind of see where God is just fed up with Israel, right? Because of all the bad kings. Judah has its share of bad kings as well, but it also has some good ones, which is going to be, we're going to talk about two today, Ahaz and Hezekiah. Ahaz, a king of Judah or Israel? He's a king of Judah. Good king or bad king? Terrible king. Terrible king. Matter of fact, he is so bad that when he dies, they don't even bury him with the other kings. All right? And so that just tells you something about him. But if there's anything good about Ahaz, is that he has a son named Hezekiah. Hezekiah, king of Judah, good king or bad king? Very good. He's so good, he even takes out the high places. Remember, have you read through the Kings? It's like he did good in the eyes of the Lord, but he didn't remove the high places. Hezekiah is one of the guys that even went in and took out the high places. So we want to talk about Ahaz and Hezekiah because they are kings that reign during the time where Isaiah is a prophet. So I'm going to try to set that up a little bit and let John jump into Isaiah a little bit here. There's lots of passages. There were lots of passages to read from 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. I want to focus on one in 2 Kings 16, if you have your Bibles, want to turn there. Because this is a story, I'm going to be honest, I don't remember reading. Sometimes the Kings and the Chronicles can become like flyover. It's like, let's just get to the good stuff. There's a lot of stuff you don't want to miss in here. But through some other places in the Chronicles, we find out that Ahaz is having a really hard time with the Philistines and some other kind of ites. I can't remember which ones it was. So he goes to Tiglath-Pileser. There's a good name for you. Who is the king of Assyria. And he tells, but you never want to go to someone that's more powerful than you and say, I'm having a problem. Can you help me? Well, you don't want to say never. But when you're a king, maybe not the best idea. Because he goes to our buddy Tiglath-Pileser, or how you want to say his name, from Assyria, asks for help. What does the king of Assyria do? Instead of helping, he's like, sees an opportunity, right? And so we also find out that Ahaz is going to go to Damascus to visit with the king of Assyria to ask for this help. And while he's there, he is in the presence of their gods. And so in 2 Kings 16, verse 10, Ahaz went to Damascus to meet with Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria. And he saw an altar in Damascus and sent to Uriah the priest a sketch of the altar. Now, this is not Uriah the Hittite. This is a different Uriah. And so think about this. The king of Judah is going to send specifications for an altar of a pagan god to the priest of Yahweh and tell him, I want you to build an altar the same way that it's been built here in Damascus. And Uriah doesn't even raise a stink. He's like, oh, okay. So Uriah builds this altar, and this is the reason I'm talking about this, is because he has it made, and now King Ahaz is going to command the people of Judah, you are to make your offerings on this altar, not the altar to the Lord, but on the altar to this God, this other God. But notice what he does in verse 14. There was a bronze altar that stood before the Lord in the temple. And so he brought it from the front of the temple, from between the new altar and the temple of the Lord, and he put it on the north side of this new altar. And then he gives this order to worship on this altar. But then we get to about the middle of 15. It says, splash against this altar all the blood of the burnt offerings and sacrifices, but I will use the bronze altar for seeking guidance. You understand what's happening? So we have this altar built to a pagan god, and now King Ahaz says, I want all sacrifices put on this altar to this god, but I'm going to leave the altar of the Lord so that I can go and make a sacrifice whenever I want to know something. Okay, whenever I need to seek guidance. Do we understand now how convoluted Judah is? I mean, to think about, you're worshiping to other gods, but you're leaving an altar to Yahweh in case you need something or want a direct line. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Well, it can be our story, right? Yeah, we come here, there's this altar that we say for Sunday mornings. And we come and we make offerings. And we leave this line open in case I ever need to get a hold of them if I'm having a rough time.
Yeah, have things gotten so bad in your life that you're willing to ask God for help? Have things gotten so challenging in your family that it's finally time to pray? I mean, I'm saying it kind of rough, but this is self-convicting, right?
How many times have we said, at least I can just pray?
Yeah.
And that's absolutely the most you can do.
The least we can do is pray. And so we have all these other altars. We don't have to get into what they all are, but we know what they are. We have other gods, if we're honest, that are tempting for us to sacrifice to. The only other thing I want to say before I really I'm just trying to set the scene here. We're not going to go through all of it before we get into Isaiah here because he's really the one that has things to say about their idolatry. When we get over to 2 Kings 17, it's a really long chapter. And he kind of goes through Israel's history. This is the reason why you guys are in trouble and all this stuff is happening. And so the king of Assyria is going to go in and conquer, but he also sends some people back. He's going to take people that are in his lands that he's already conquered, and he sends them in to Israel to live. Why? There you go. That's right. You want assimilation, right? You want people that are going to go back into this land and kind of live the way you want them to. And so they all take their gods from their nations and they kind of settle back into Israel. By the way, when we get into the New Testament, we get these people called the Samaritans. This is kind of how this starts to happen. People from Israel and Judah are going to move back and they're going to assimilate. They're going to marry those who worship pagan gods. And that's why the Israelites, the Jews, really had a problem with Samaritans and vice versa, but won't get into all that today. But I love this part. This part I loved as a kid. So they the king of Assyria sends people back into this land to live and with their gods. Did anybody catch the part where they started worshiping everyone but Yahweh? And so what does God do? He sent lions to kill all the people that were worshiping these pagan gods. And they're like, send somebody back and tell the king this is not working out too well. Right? And they do, and so the king says, oh, okay, find somebody from exile who's a priest of the Lord and send them back and teach them about Yahweh. And they do. And now what you have is, okay, we need to make sure we sacrifice to Yahweh, but we don't give up our gods. And so it says they worship the Lord, but they also serve their own gods at 17, verse 32 and 33. But I like verse 34. It says they neither worship the Lord nor adhere to the decrees or his regulations. So they're saying, yeah, we're worshiping God. But verse 34 says, you're not really. So again, going back what we've been talking about in Daniel, I think the biggest obstacle is not atheism here. They all believe in gods. It's polytheism that's the real problem.
Like, it's easy to paint the bad picture of them there, but their mindset is, I'm just trying to cover my bases.
Sure.
And, like, that's a mentality that we can all easily, like, understand because we employ that every day with so many other things. So you go, well, I know you're saying that Yahweh is God, and that's great. I believe that. But also, like, I want to make sure that in case he isn't, I've got a backup. And so, like, I'm going to put 80% of my eggs in that basket, and then I've got 20% that I'm going to give to these other 7 gods that can take care of these other things for me. At least they say they can. Obviously, they can't. That's not the point of it. But the idea is, like, I would just want to make sure that I have a contingency plan when Yahweh doesn't, like that. It's not even an if, because if it was an if, then you wouldn't put any stock into it. It's a when that doesn't work out. I've got a backup plan.
Yes,
And we operate the same way.
It's a contingency plan, right? Going to cover all the bases. And this is not just for the Israelites and for the Samaritans. This is Greek and Roman culture as well, right? Remember when Paul was in Athens? You have this altar to who? To the unknown gods. Well, why would you worship a God that you don't know? Just in case there's anything that he wants from me that I don't know about, I want to make a sacrifice to that God to cover all my bases.
But what if the God that we worship most of the time is our own desires and our own plans and our own individuality? Then it's not that we go and seek help from some other God. It's that we say, I'm going to do everything within my power to achieve my outcomes and my plans and my thoughts and my dreams. And if it doesn't work out and I get really stuck, then maybe I'll ask God for help.
Now, me, I'm going to worship Jesus Christ 100%. That's just my thing, And I don't want to have a backup plan from Jesus. I just want to have Jesus the whole way.
Yeah.
I'm worshiping a God that I know is merciful and is going to be there no matter what. But I don't want to worship anything else because I know for a fact that it's not going to work. And I know for a fact that Jesus works. So I just rather give 100% to Jesus Christ.
And that's what he calls for, right? But even the early Christians had a hard time. This is the whole book of Galatians, which we've studied. It's Jesus and circumcision. We're going to give 98% to Jesus and 2% to circumcision, or whatever it is. But whenever we're in trouble, whenever we say it's God and something else that gives us our salvation. And he's going to talk about Isaiah here, but put a pin in that, thinking about the book of Hosea. Because I think one of the only ways that God is going to get his people to realize this, and man, this is a very powerful book for us, is he says, I want you to think about an adulterous relationship where you're pouring everything you have into this marriage, into this spouse of yours, and what is she doing? She's going to other men, other places. She's a prostitute. And so that's kind of God's way of kind of explaining to us of what it's like for him to have a people that he's married to, yet they keep committing adultery.
Comments? Anything you put down in your notes this week in this section that you want to throw out there, or add to or ask Daryl a question that he can't answer?
There's plenty of those.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Isaiah. Does Isaiah feel repetitive? What do you experience? What did you experience this week as you're reading through these chunks of Isaiah?
Anybody in here like the frosting on a cake or a cupcake, but not the cake itself? We tend to do that with Isaiah, especially around Christmas time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about virgin birth. Let's talk about a child is born. Let's talk about a new light, a dawning in darkness. We love that. And occasionally in communion time, we'll go to Isaiah 53 and talk about a suffering servant. For most of us, though, I'd venture to say we don't really know a whole lot about what Isaiah is about, other than those chapters. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of questions there.
So, what was the core question that we're answering this year, exploring this year, by reading the Bible together? What's important to God? Do you believe that one of the core prophets would have some information about what's important to God? This book is rich with what is important to God. Now, in order to explore what is important to God, there is a prerequisite. You have to care what's important to God. Now, I'm not saying that flippantly. I'm serious. You have to look at your life and say, no matter what I'm doing in my life, if it's not what's important to God, I want to be doing that. You have to be willing to say that if this makes God mad, I don't want to be doing that. And if this makes God happy, that's where I want to be. And so Isaiah, what did I mean by it's, why did I offer the idea that it's repetitive? It keeps going back and forth. I'm going to crush these people, and I'm going to save these people. These people make me really mad, and I love them, and I'm going to make everything right. Over and over and over again. Now, a lot of these, when you think of prophecy, you've got to think of several things. You've got to think of the fact that somebody heard this message the first time, right? The initial audience. And then you have to think that, guess what? There's going to be people in the near future, we'll say in the next 100 to 200 years, that are going to hear this message and go, hey, you know what? Some of this stuff is taking place, and everything that he said before happened, or a chunk of what he said. And then there's going to be people at the time of Christ that go, oh my goodness, the stuff that Isaiah was talking about is taking place. And then there's going to be people sitting at the Oakdale congregation on a Sunday morning going, hey, this stuff is still taking place. So remember that prophecy is actually nailing down a lot of truth in multiple time frames, depending on where the listener finds themselves in that timeline. I want to read something that struck me, and then I'm going to give you guys the chance to do the same. I want to tell you that I read something this week that struck me so profound, as if it was Isaiah writing to me today, and maybe writing to this culture of Christians today. And it's in chapter 8, verses 11 through 15. Now he's talking about, to give you context, he's talking about the fact that Assyria is coming. And God's judgment is coming. And everybody's worried about it because the Assyrians are literally on the doorstep. It's like things have gotten really bad. Before things get worse, they're going to get worse, right? So he says this starting in verse 11. This is what the Lord says to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me, not to follow the way of this people or the culture around you. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. He will be a holy place for both Israel and Judah. He will be a stone that causes people to stumble and a rock that makes them fall. And for the people of Jerusalem, he will be a trap and a snare. Many of them will stumble. They will fall and be broken. They will be snared and captured. Did that strike anybody like it struck me? Does that feel accurate today? Don't be worried about all the conspiracies. Don't be worried about what everybody says is going to happen or the bad things or how things are going to work out or who's going to be in charge or how things are going to go or how bad it's going to get or how good it's going to be. What was God's message here? Trust in him. He uses the word fear because he's in charge. He's going to do what he's going to do.
He's the trump card for all of this chaos.
He is.
Whatever bad hand you have.
And again, I want to say it. We see chaos around us. God does not see chaos.
You could almost say, in spite of current circumstances, God is still in control.
Someone might say that. I think this is confession time. I think I spend a lot of time, especially because of what I do. People come to me not because I know the past. I'm a financial advisor and planner. People don't come to me to plan the past. They're more interested in the future. And they want to know what I think about the future. And sometimes I get stuck with the idea that maybe I should have an opinion about that. Does that make sense? And so I have to watch a lot of news. I have to watch way more news than any of you would ever choose to watch, hopefully. And it's really hard to watch all of that and hear all these people prognosticate about what's going on and what's going on under the surface and where it's going to lead and what it's going to mean. And take all that in and just say at the end of it, okay, that's all interesting, but none of these people are in charge. None of them. God's in charge.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, you just did.
I'm going to ask you more questions. So, it seems like a lot of times these kind of verses are double-edged swords in that people will read it and go, see, God tells us we don't have to fear. Don't worry about it. But they can also use that to be, let's crawl underneath a rock and not worry about anybody or anything else. So as I was talking about today, we need to take the sacred to the secular,
Yes.
right? Salt is only good when it rubs up against something else. It's applied to something else. So I just wanted to know kind of your take. How do we look at this, which I agree, and go, yeah, we're not going to worry about it because the Lord's in control, but also not just put our head under a rock and say, it's not my problem.
Well, I'm going to say two things. One of them is going to be helpful, and the other one's going to be hurtful. I'll do the helpful one first. The reason Israel and Judah are in this position is because they did not know what was important to God, and they did not care what was important to God. If they had cared what was important to God, they would have been a light on a hill. They would have been a light to the nations. They would have been like the place that Solomon's kingdom was 5 minutes before he decided to go marry a bunch of foreign women and trash the kingdom. He would have been the place that foreign leaders came and said, certainly your God is a God of justice and righteousness. But no one's finding a God of justice and righteousness in Israel anymore because they're not being a light on a hill. That doesn't mean they're not sacrificing. That doesn't mean they're not, quote, going to church. We find out in Isaiah 2, he says, who told you to do all these sacrifices? I'm tired of them. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but who did tell them to do all those sacrifices? God did. So there's something about their sacrifices that is in no way in alignment with what he told them to do. And I think it's the fact that they don't really care what's important to God anymore. And so what do they care about? They care about the culture that's around them. They have allowed the culture that's around them to be more important than what's important to God.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, the rituals mean more than the meaning.
Right.
But if we do the rituals, we're good, right?
Not if you don't realize where they sprung from.
Right. That's Isaiah 58. That's my favorite chapter in Isaiah. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. We're fasting. Where's the blessing? So he goes on to say, well, if you would do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing of the finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like noonday.
So what's important to God? That's actually a question. Yeah.
Justice, Lord, mercy, walk humbly with your God.
Is it important to God that we know what to do? Is it important that we know what God thinks is important? And then finally, is it important that we do it?
Absolutely.
You can be really good at knowing it. You can be proud of knowing it. You can be combative in knowing it. You can be confident in knowing it. But what Israel isn't doing is doing it. And they haven't done it for so long that they're even forgetting about it. I'm still in the process of raising kids. I don't have any of my kids in here this morning, so I can say this a little freer. I am still in the process of trying to raise my children in the faith that I want to give them. It is not as easy as I expected it to be. So not only are we going to see in Hosea, we're going to see the allegory of a marriage relationship, we're also going to see the allegory of a parenting relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have been a parent, if you are still a parent, I would assume that my experience is not all that different than yours, and that there's moments of it that are very, very difficult. And you just can't beat them the way they used to be able to. And get away with it. I don't mean that, but you know what I mean.
Probably a good thing, yeah.
That's right. So I want to wrap up Isaiah with something that is both familiar and unfamiliar, and that is I want to go to chapter 6. And I want to race through a big chunk of 6 because most of us have heard most of 6. Even if you didn't read this week, you've heard this before. And this is the calling of Isaiah. It's the moment that Isaiah is swept up into heaven, into the throne room, and he sees the Lord, and he sees the angels and the seraphim, and he falls with dread, and he says, "How can I be here? I am a man of unclean lips who lives among a people of unclean lips." And the angel comes over and touches his mouth with a coal, which there's no commentary about, but that couldn't have felt good. And he's been cleaned, and God says somebody needs to go and tell the people a message, and he says, what does he say? "Here am I, send me." Okay? And so we understand that part. We remember that part of 6. But I want to finish out the chapter. I'm going to start in another part that we also really know very well is it says that this is going to be a people who will be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Do you guys remember that? So he's going to finish out, and I'll just read from 11 on. "Then I said, 'For how long, Lord?' He answered, 'Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitants, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste.'" Think about that. He's saying not only is there's going to be a remnant, and then of the remnant, I'm going to destroy even more. We're paring this way back. And then he says here at the end, but as the terebinth and oak leave stumps where they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. This is one of those pregnant little phrases that has so much meaning for so long, and it talks about maybe the most time periods. You could grab any time period, and we can probably go look at this verse and say, wow, that really kind of is telling us something important. He's saying that the stump is going to end up being the seed. I want to think about in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus tells the story of the sower. Do you remember that? The sower and the soils? And some seed was thrown here, and some seed was thrown there, and some of it worked, most of it didn't, right? Kind of familiar to this passage here as a remnant, as a part that is going to take what's important to God and move forward. And then after the parable, Jesus goes and he talks to his disciples. And he says, what does he say about understanding parables in that moment? Do you guys remember? He says, some will listen and not understand. He's coming back to Isaiah 6. Some will see and not understand. He's talking about that exact same passage, that not everybody's going to get this. And then he says about himself, he says that a seed must fall to the ground and what? And die. So he's the seed, right? And so we're going to see this stump that becomes the seed. We're going to see this seed taken all the way forward basically to the idea of the cross, where this seed is going to be lifted up and died and put into the ground for 3 days. And that is where we're going to see this new kingdom established and this new king appointed. So resurrection brings kingship. And so all of these things that we're talking about here, the punishment, the going off to Assyria, going off to Babylon, all of these things are bringing about purification. They're bringing about a return over time to who God wants his people to be. And who God wants his people to be is going to eventually be the church. And his church is supposed to be a group of people who know what is important to God and who live what is important to God. Hosea.
Light reading. What did you get from the book of Hosea? Again, who is Hosea? He's a priest and a prophet. Hosea marries a woman by the name of what? Gomer. I always think Gomer Pyle as soon as I hear that.
Don't be a Gomer.
This book has got the storyline is not that hard to understand. Why God does what he does, I think, is the hardest part. And I don't know if we actually, again, I think he needs to show Israel what it's like for him. I mean, God is in an abusive relationship. You ever think about that? God is in an abusive relationship. And usually when someone's in an abusive relationship, what do we tell that person? You need to get out. And that's good advice. What does God do? You know, have you ever heard the statement, you can't fix somebody? But God can. And so that's the reason he stays in a relationship. We can't fix each other. We can give each other advice. We can walk with one another when we're struggling, but there's only one fixer. And that's God. And so if God abandons his people, well, what do they have left? And so God is going to call Hosea to take And he knows before he gets in this relationship. Like, you ever gotten into a relationship, you don't have to share details, but you wish you would have knew something before you got into it, and you're like, now I know. I mean, Hosea knows before he takes this wife what he's getting, because God tells him that this is what's going to happen. And so he takes a wife, and they have a couple children. The first one's name is Jezreel, because that's going to be the place where he destroys a bunch of people. We won't. I don't know if we need to get into that. But then he has a daughter named Lo Ruhamah. What does her name mean? Not loved. Yeah, don't go with that one for baby names, okay? Not loved. And then he's going to have another son by the name of Lo-Ami, which means not my people. Okay, so these are the offspring that are produced from this adulterous relationship. Wrath and war, not loved, and not my people. And yet, what is Hosea instructed to do every time that Gomer commits adultery? Take her back. What's that? Woo her back. Yeah, I like that even better. Yeah. I mean, just think about what Ben just said, which is absolutely right. It's not just like the door's open, let yourself in. It's go get her and love her. I mean, it gives me chills thinking about it. But with all that said, it is a very difficult book to read. But there are some highlights in it.
What do you think about the fact that God actually calls a prophet to live this life? First of all, this is an allegory, right? Only it's a living allegory. And it shows just how disrespected God is in the relationship with his people, with his children. But yet he asks Hosea to go live out this awful experience that God is having in real life. How many want this calling? It's kind of Job-like, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Hosea doesn't really seem to have much of a choice in the matter. He's obedient. This takes me back. I told you I was going to tell you something encouraging and then tell you something that was not as encouraging. And that is, when God has a plan to punish, when God has a plan to purify, should we be dreadful? Should we be faithful? Should we be content? What should we be? Submissive. What else? Okay, me too. Me too.
She said, I'll go with fearful. In which case, we're starting to try to remember that people watching at home can't hear what you say. So if we start repeating it, we're not parrots, we're just trying to help. Go ahead.
I just said thankful.
Thank you.
Are we okay with God working his plan? Even if it costs us something. Even if we don't always understand it.
Right? I mean, it doesn't matter what I like. I'm a serf. You know, I'm not the one in charge. You know, there's lots of times when you submit yourselves to somebody and the plan they have is not what you want to have happen, and it doesn't matter because you're not in charge. So whether I'm okay with it is kind of irrelevant. What is incredibly relevant is that God's plan is fulfilled because it is a good and perfect plan, no matter what that means for my life.
Yeah, Zach says, I'm a serf. It doesn't really matter what I think. I'm working the land. And I totally agree. And I see myself as a serf a lot, but I have to remind myself that I'm also royalty. Okay? I am I'm given this inheritance as a child of God to the kingdom. So you talk about paradoxes. It's like, yes, I am the servant, and it doesn't really matter what I think because God's going to do. But also, God really values what I think and loves me and has given me a seat at the table. And so we always live with that tension, I think. And I think maybe that tension is good because we don't just start, kicking back our feet at the table going, I don't do anything. But also, as a serf, you see some relief and you can see what all this work is for, right? Rod?
The paradox and the tension of, as an individual, and there's so many things that is like, well, my parents' faith, it can't take care of me. I have to have my own faith, and I have to have my own relationship with Jesus and with God. So we're very good at being individuals. But then I see stories like this, and it's hard for me to be like, oh, that really stinks for that individual to be going through that circumstance. But then, I have a hard time having a group mentality or what's best for the group. I'm a part of a larger collective, and it would sure be hard to say I'm taking this one for the team, I guess, but it kind of had to be done, and you have to just almost, I don't know, think you may have another is the right response, but.
Yeah, so Rod's saying that basically our culture is so different than the previous culture here because they think in community. Here's what's going to happen to Israel. Hey, don't be worried if 90% of the country is slaughtered. Don't be worried about that. I'm thinking 90%, my chances aren't good. Don't be worried because the nation's going to survive and Jesus is going to sit on the throne and all these great things. So don't be worried about that. Don't be troubled by that. I think like an American, like an individual, and I go, I'm quite troubled about that. That affects me quite a bit, and I'm not a big fan. And yeah, it'd be great for everybody who survives, but what about me in that turmoil? So I'm like you, Rod. I'm like, okay. So going back to the idea of taking one for the team, can we think of anybody else who's taken one for the team? Jesus. So this is the question. And now we got just a second. I want to just say this. This is the core question. This is why this is an adult class and not VBS. Is God good? And if so, am I on his side and am I going to submit to what he's doing? And am I going to believe that in the long haul it is the best thing other than anything else that I can come up with? That is a core faith question. That if we're going to read Isaiah, if we're going to read what's going on in this period in the Bible, and if we're going to get out of our American comfort zone and decide to be a light on a hill, we have to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Hosea was the first guy in Israel to have a wife that was unfaithful. But Hosea wasn't some farmer out on some mountain,
Right.
out in the sticks. Hosea was a public figure. And not only that, but Hosea was surrounded by other priests.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to wonder if Hosea saw some little flashes of light from the other priests every once in a while when they got it, well, I got this weekend gig to go, up to Samaria to, run services at the calf, and Hosea's like, is that really what you want to do? Because you see what I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
It was a tough calling, but when you're in a position of influence, you can expect to get called up, and you gotta, that's a choice. If you're going to take the position of influence, are you going to do the things that come with it or not?
That's why the words of, I think it's Peter in John 6, are so profound. Many disciples desert Jesus after he says, eat my flesh, drink my blood. And remember the question Jesus asked the disciples? Do you want to go too? You want to desert me? And they say, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. Sometimes it's not easy being a disciple. It definitely wasn't easy. If I got a call saying, hey, would you want to be a prophet for the Lord? I would think long and hard about it. Because,
You kind of already answered that question.
yeah. If you got the call, right? Hypothetically speaking, right? I mean, Ezekiel's going to lay on his side for like a year and then turn on the other side. And I mean, weird stuff.
Yeah.
But to whom shall we go? Who else has the words of life? I know sometimes it seems hard as a Christian. It's like we're just getting kicked and beaten and all over the place. I mean, I don't even know if we really even know what that's like in America right now. But we see how hard it is for others and how hard it can be for us. But you think it's hard now. How hard would it be without the Lord?
So let's close with this thought, which is a lot of what Daryl's talking about with the book of Daniel, and it's pretty simple. And that is, are we going to choose to be influenced by the culture around us and see the value in that, or are we going to be influenced by God and what's important to Him? It's a simple question. And once we've made the decision, we need to be the light on the hill, proclaiming who it is that we're going to follow, God or culture. Daryl, you want to close us?
Yeah, just so you know, we're going to be reading in the book of Psalms the next 2 weeks.
Yes.
A lot to read. I just want to say this. As you read, don't take extensive notes. That's not the way Psalms is meant to be read. Okay? I want you to be thinking about context, who's writing them, when was it written, but let yourself enjoy these and think about what it meant to them, and then maybe come next week with your favorite psalm that you read. Okay?
Even more than that. We used to have a men's group. It was a generator group that was going through the Psalms. And our process was pretty simple. And that is that we would read a block of 5 to 8 Psalms, and we would land on one, each individually. We would land on one that spoke to us, that challenged us, or that we could, it grabbed us. And we spent some time in that one Psalm trying to understand and deeply understand what that Psalm was speaking to us. I'm going to encourage you guys to do the same as we get through the Psalm. Find one. Land on it. Look at how it's structured. We're going to have a heavy lifting group of Psalms for the next 2 weeks. And what I would really like to do is when we start the 3rd week after we've completed the Psalms, I would love it if a few of you would write a psalm. Look at what you're reading. Look at how it's structured. Find out where you are in your relationship with God. Look what the writer is doing. Look at where they end. And ask yourself the question, if I were to write down where I'm at with God, if I were to write down how I feel right now, if I were to write down what I need right now, what would it look like? I'm going to challenge you guys to have, I'd love to read a few of those Psalms in class that you write about where you are right now and what you need. These are moments where somebody is having an intense relationship with God and they put it on paper. That would be a great way to wrap up our Psalm section, if some of you are willing to do that.
If you don't know which Psalms we're talking about, there's sheets out there you can grab on your way. Let me just close we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'll give you a priestly blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and give you peace. We'll see you next week.